Hello Year 10. Okay, so we're going to analyse Stave 2 Part 2 today. So the first thing I want you to do is to write down your title and your date. So your title is analysing Stave 2 Part 2 and only your teacher knows when the date is. For my class it is Wednesday the 20th of May. Okay, just a quick reminder that you're completing this work in your books so that you have all your work together for when you come to revise in Year 11. So today's lesson will help you to analyse the novel and write exam answers, building towards your next assessment. So as always, let's start with a vocabulary starter. So our keyword for the lesson is benevolence. Benevolence is a noun. The adjective would be benevolent. Okay, so benevolence, behaving in a warm and generous way towards your fellow humans. So being warm and generous towards your fellow humans, which is often linked to charity. So the charitable men from Stave 1 could be described as benevolent. But instead I want you to focus on Stave 2. So you need to copy the word benevolence and a definition into your book, and underneath I want you to write in Stave 2, I would describe character's name as benevolent. So write a sentence in your book now. Please pause the video. Okay, so we are going to add to our context corner in our exercise books, and today's context is looking at the rights of workers in Victorian England. So workers had no rights and were usually desperate for jobs. So there were no trade unions defending the rights and protecting the rights of workers in these factories. So no rights. And we'll have a look at what they didn't have as part of that lack of rights. So they had no health care. Okay, so no health care attached to their jobs, especially if they got into an accident in their job. No education, so there was no opportunities to be educated, no supporting them getting educated, no sickness pay, so if you felt ill, you would not get paid for the period you were off sick. You didn't get any holidays. You might get the bank holidays off, like Christmas, but you wouldn't get a holiday pay for it. If you had a baby, or if your partner had a baby, you would not get maternity or paternity pay if you had to take time off. You wouldn't get compensation if you were injured. Now, wages were low, and therefore the people who worked in these factories in Victorian England had no way of working their way out of poverty. If they couldn't access education, if they weren't supported in accessing education, then they were never going to be able to lift themselves out of poverty. The conditions were terrible. They were very dangerous working conditions, and many people were injured and died as a result of working in industrial London. So you now need to pick the most 3 important points and write them in your book, and I will do this along with you. So when you've got a lot of little bitty pieces of information like that, rather than writing them all down, it's good to put it away and then see what you can remember. So Victorian workers had no rights. So I want 3 details. So no trade unions, no medical pay, for example sick pay, maternity, so anything related to medical. No, they didn't pay. Doctors were not free back in the Victorian era. You had to pay to see a doctor. There was no healthcare to pay for the doctors. And then the last one that I'm going to do is that very dangerous, but with no compensation if you did get injured. Okay. Right, so if you've not yet got down your 3 bullet points for your mind map, Let's do a little arrow there. So we've worked around, haven't we, for Stave 1 Part 1, Stave 1 Part 2, Stave 2 Part 1, Stave 2 Part 2. Probably going to run out of space after Stave 3. Never mind, you've got bigger books than I have. Okay, Year 10, so the next thing we're going to do is some extract analysis. So as always, we need to look at our question, we need to highlight the keywords in the question. So the question today is, to what extent is Scrooge presented as a changed man in this extract? So, the focus of the question is Scrooge and his change. So those are two very important things that we need to pick out, but also we're asked to what extent. So fully, partially, not at all, we need to evaluate here. So, we're looking at Scrooge as a changed man. So let's have a look at the extract. I'm going to read through it. As I do, please highlight any quotes that you think help us to see him as a changed man or not. During the whole of this time, Scrooge had acted like a man out of his wits. His heart and soul were in the scene and with his former self. He corroborated everything, remembered everything, enjoyed everything, and underwent the strangest agitation. It was not until now, when the bright faces of his former self and Dick were turned from them, that he remembered the ghost and became conscious that it was looking full upon him, while the light upon its head burnt very clear. "A small matter," said the ghost, "to make these silly folks so full of gratitude." "Small?" echoed Scrooge. The spirit signed to him to listen to the two apprentices, who were pouring out their hearts in praise of Fezziwig, and when he had done so, said, "Why?" Sorry, it should be the ghost. "Why, is it not? He spent but a few pounds of your mortal money, 3 or 4 perhaps. Is it so much that he deserves this praise?" "It isn't that," said Scrooge, heated by the remark, and speaking unconsciously like his former, not his latter self. "It isn't that, Spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. See that his power lies in words and looks, in things so slight and insignificant that it's impossible to add and count them up. What then? The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune." He felt the spirit's glance and stopped. "What is the matter?" asked the ghost. "Nothing particular," said Scrooge. "Something, I think." "Now," said Scrooge, "now, I should like to be able to say a word or two to my clock just now. That's all." Right. So what I want you to do is I want you to take a highlighter and highlight 3 to 5 quotes that you think answer the question. So either show or do not show Scrooge to be a changed man. Pause the video now and do that. Okay, so I'm going to highlight some quotes that I think are quite interesting. Okay, so here, like a man out of his wits and strangest agitation, I think this is the imagery of someone who is acting out of character. Almost disturbed. So that would suggest that yes, he is changed. Now, I would say the happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune, because as we spoke about last lesson, this noun fortune shows that Scrooge still focuses on value and worth as a financial concept. So he's not changed that much, but he has a bit, because he's comparing happiness to great wealth. So we have here an alternative interpretation. So if we're evaluating how much Scrooge has changed, we're saying, well, he's still talking in financial terms to show that he's still a greedy person, but he's now comparing happiness to money to show that he can see that that's a value too. Alternative interpretation for a grade 7 or higher. Okay, so we've got 3 quotes so far. Now I think this is important because, as I said last lesson, it's that repetition. Oh, sorry, you can't see it. It's that repetition of the phrase that he used in earlier in the stave when he was talking about how he wanted to give a word to the carol singer. However, at the same time, whilst he's showing this regret, and you will have noticed I used our key word from the last lesson, inspired by Fezziwig's benevolence, I think this also shows he retains some of his abrupt nature as seen through the simple sentence. So he's still quite an abrupt person. Yeah. Okay, so that's our annotations done. Okay guys, so as always, we start by making an umbrella statement that sums up all the quotes that we've just highlighted. So this is something you might want to write. In this extract, Scrooge is beginning to change to recognise the power of benevolence, and that's our lovely key word for the lesson, but still retains some of his old characteristics. Now, this is a great point sentence. It's really strong, but if we are wanting to think about making this higher level, then we need to rewrite it so that it's focused on what Dickens is doing. So in this extract, Dickens uses the beginning of Scrooge's change to highlight. Right, see if you can finish off that sentence. Okay, so instead of just saying Scrooge is beginning to change, say, right, Dickens uses the beginning of that change to highlight something. So what's he saying about society? Okay, so you should have finished that sentence. Okay, so we want to think about our context. So our context is going to be about workers' rights, isn't it? And the fact that there's lots of irresponsible employers. So Fezziwig is a rarity, and Scrooge realising this is meant to be a marker for the Victorian reader that they are meant to realise the power of a good employer. So looking at the writer's message, Dickens wants the Victorian reader to similarly recognise the power of being a, let's go for that keyword, benevolent employer. Okay, and then we've highlighted the quotes. So we've got our umbrella point, and this is fine if you want to use this, but if we are aiming for grade 7 or higher, we want to put Dickens front and centre, and you might want to use this to help you build up that point. Straight after the point you go into your context, and then you go into your quotes. So I've helped you, and we've highlighted 4 quotes together. I think that's plenty. I think in your answer you probably should be getting between 2 and 4 quotes in there, depending on how much detail you go into. Just a quick reminder, let's see if I've got this written down anywhere. Yeah. We've got our point, which is the overall impression of Scrooge, whether he's changing, and we try to link that to Dickens's purpose. Context, what influenced Dickens, we've just covered that. And then you go, quote 1. Give me your quote, say what the technique is, talk about the effect of the technique. Zoom in on a word, talk about the effect of that word. Overall effect on the reader. Quote 2, technique effect, zoom effect, overall effect. Quote 3, technique effect, zoom effect, overall effect. And then you summarise. Therefore, Dickens, what? And at this point, I would answer the question. So therefore, Dickens shows Scrooge to be changed partially. And that is what I would argue personally. And let me show you why. So last bit from me. So he displays behaviour of having changed. So he's acting out of character. But then, and I was tempted to highlight that, then he returns to his old style of speech. Okay? Now the key quote, I think, if you were just going to focus on 2 quotes, the key quotes would be this one and the one on the next page. So I've already explained you've got this alternative interpretation. So yes, he focuses on the benevolence of Fezziwig. So he's comparing happiness and the power of happiness to the power of money. But the fact that he's still focusing on money as the main currency shows that he's still focused on finance. And then this is my second favourite quote. She'd like to be able to say a word or two to my clock just now, that's all. I would focus on the simple sentence, that's all, to show he's still abrupt, but the declarative sentence I should like to be able to say, the openness with which he shares that shows he conveys his regret, tone of regret, inspired by Fezziwig's benevolence. Okay, Year 10. So please can you get your analysis paragraph written up for me? Just have a look at the following paragraph opener. It's not got any of the quotes analysed, but this is just an umbrella point, context, and then a little bit of the writer's message. So, in the extract, Dickens uses this scene to emphasise how Scrooge is on the path to redemption and beginning to change. Dickens was very critical of the way the majority of employers failed to give their employees acceptable and safe working conditions or any rights at all. However, Fezziwig is present as a benevolent employer who brought happiness to all who worked for him. Compare that to your paragraph opening and see if you can improve yours any. Do that with a green pen. Okay, pause. And finally, let's have a look at the success criteria. So if you're looking for a grade 5 or higher, you need to make a clear point which shows understanding of the extract. If you're going for a grade 7 or higher, you need to make an umbrella point that identifies not only patterns in language, but uses academic verbs to be specific about Dickens's message. 5 or higher links points to context, so in the Victorian era this was happening. 7 or higher considers what Dickens is trying to say about Victorian society. So Dickens was critical of this in Victorian society. That's the difference. So in one you say this is happening in Victorian society. In the other you say Dickens was critical of this in Victorian society. That's the only difference between a 5 and a 7. Grade 5, 3 interesting quotations. Grade 7, the most appropriate quotations, embedded well. Grade 5, identify a technique or word and give a clear effect. Grade 7, analyse imagery and a range of devices being specific and detailed about effects. Grade 5, you consider the writer's message. Grade 7, you evaluate the writer's message. So you weigh up what the message is. And alternative interpretations. What did I say? Alternative interpretations. For a grade 5, you use ambitious vocabulary, and you do for a grade 7 as well. So last thing, we'll just look at that ambitious vocabulary. So we have looked at misanthropic, benevolence, empathy, philanthropic, and I think that's it. Right, Year 10. So go and have a look at your paragraph that you have written for me. Try and work out whether you think it's a grade 5 and above or a grade 7 or above, or whether it's not quite made it up to the grade 5 standards. Hopefully it has. Okay, you take care. Bye-bye.